In the early 1990s, adventure games were built by teams writers, artists, and programmers, all working together inside studios like Sierra and Lucasfilm. But on January 1st, 1990, one programmer did something very different. David P. Gray wasn't trying to compete with anyone. Hugo's House of Horrors was a side project, a plan B, built after hours, inspired by Leisure Suit Larry, old horror films, and a simple question: could one person make an adventure game that people would actually play? Released as shareware and passed from PC to PC, Hugo didn't arrive with a manual, an introduction, or instructions. It dropped you outside a house and asked one thing: can you figure this out on your own? Today, we're stepping inside that house to explore how a single experiment became a cult classic, and why sometimes the smallest projects leave the longest shadows on today's trip down memory card lane. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. I hope these words find you well. Hello and welcome to the 279th episode of our video game history podcast, A Trip Down Memory Card Lane. Each week we'll tell you a story relevant to the current week in gaming history. It can be about a game or the people who have created it. It can be about a console or the technology that brought it to life. We often talk about the companies that bring it all together, making our hobby, video games, a reality. While telling you each story, we hope to teach you something new about the topic, what it took from the world as its inspiration, or what it gave back to the world in its legacy. Today, we are telling the story of Hugo's House of Horrors, a one man shareware project that found a surprising audience among early PC gamers. I'm David Casson, and as always, I'm joined by my brother, who's definitely the guy who'd open a suspicious door in a haunted house just to see what's inside. He's my brother, my co host, Rob Casson. Rob, if you suddenly found yourself trapped inside a haunted mansion, what's the first thing you would do?
Well, Dave, I'd probably be looking for those talking heads.
It's a good band.
Good van?
The Talking Heads.
Oh, band. I thought you said van.
No, good band. Good musical
Oh,
group.
well, they did sing very well in that one movie.
We have the best banter, don't we?
Sometimes.
Is there a podcast from out there where you put two dry people together and it works?
Well, I couldn't tell you, Dave. I don't listen to our own podcast, let alone others.
That is the most real thing you've said in a long time.
The hell it is.
I don't
But it is
listen
real.
to our podcast. Yeah, same. Well, we have a story about Hugo's House of Horror. But before we get to said story, why don't you share with our listeners what else has happened during this week in gaming history?
Kicking it off on December 29th, 1994, Raven Software released Heretic for DOS, a dark fantasy first-person shooter built on a modified version of id Software's Doom engine. Unlike Doom's sci-fi setting, Heretic plunged players into gothic dungeons filled with undead warriors, flying gargoyles, and magical artifacts. The game introduced several innovations to the FPS formula, including an inventory system that let players collect and use items like the powerful Tome of Power, which temporarily enhanced weapons. With atmospheric level design, eerie soundscapes, and a rich fantasy aesthetic, Heretic stood out from its contemporaries and quickly gained a loyal following. It was the start of Raven's successful Heretic and Hexen series, carving a niche for fantasy-themed shooters in an era dominated by science fiction and horror. Today, it's remembered as both a worthy Doom sibling and a bold step in a diversifying early FPS design.
Yeah, it was definitely one of the games that kind of like stood out in that early the Doom clone phase. I remember the Hexens and the heretics. I don't even know. I think I used to call it heretic and it's heretic, but anyway, it's That's all I'll say. It stood out. It stood out in the Doom clone era.
Well, I'm glad that you remember, Dave, because it definitely is not one that I recall.
Meh.
Next up, on January 1st, 1995, Battle Arena Toshinden was released for the PlayStation in Japan, becoming one of the first fighting games to feature fully 3D polygonal graphics. Developed by Tamsoft and published by Takara, the game stood out for its innovative 8-way movement system, allowing players to sidestep and circle around opponents in a dynamic 3D space. It introduced a colorful cast of weapon wow. It introduced a colorful cast of weapon-wielding fighters, each with distinct styles, and helped showcase the PlayStation's graphical power in its early years. Though quickly eclipsed by competitors like Tekken, it remains a groundbreaking title in the evolution of 3D fighting games. We actually covered this back in episode 227, so if you want to learn more, go listen.
What do we learn on the Tishinen episode?
Dave, I don't listen to the podcast.
I do. I just, I, I just did a little social media snippet on Battle Arena Toshinden. It was the first. It was the first fighting game to step into full 3D.
Oh, really? I thought I said that.
You did say that.
I did.
You did. Yes, I'm
And I
aware.
probably related it to Pokken Tournament, which was a fully 3D, 8 directional movement Pokemon fighting game.
Ooh, yeah,
Because that's what that reminds me of. So I probably talked about it then.
yeah. You love your Pokemons.
Well, it's not the only franchise I love. Another one that actually came to fruition thanks to Dave on January 3rd, 1997, Blizzard North released Diablo for Windows and Canada, introducing players to one of the most influential action RPGs of all time. Set in the dark gothic town of Tristram, players descended into randomly generated dungeons to battle hordes of demons and eventually confront Diablo, the Lord of Terror himself.
He is scary.
Indeed. And the Butcher. That's a different one. With its addictive point and click combat, randomized loot, and seamless blend of RPG mechanics with fast paced action, Diablo set a new standard for the genre. Its online multiplayer through Battle.net further cemented its place as a pioneer, laying the groundwork for the loot driven design that continues to define action RPGs today. This one was covered way the hell back in episode 19. So check it out if you want to know the full story of how Diablo became a legend, and just know that that episode's probably going to suck because it was so long ago. Not that they don't all, but you know.
Very, very early episode. It doesn't
Indeed.
suck. That was like one of. No, it sucks. All the early ones suck, but that was one of the early episodes that I like laid into the history, right? Because we had found the original design document, and it was a very interesting to look at what Blizzard rather's original plan was kind of like this almost microtransaction based game. They were going to sell like cheap episodes in the stores, and then what it turned into. Also, it wasn't even going to be an action RPG in the beginning. It was going to be turn based, and the original studio that worked on it was Condor, and then Blizzard.
Dave, I'm just going to stop you there. If you want to learn, go check out episode 19.
Yeah, it's an interesting story.
So go check it out. Next up, on December 29th, 1999, Sega released Shenmue for the Dreamcast in Japan, an ambitious title that redefined what an open world game could be. Developed by Yu Suzuki and AM2, it blended martial arts combat, detective gameplay, and daily life simulation in a detailed recreation of 1980s Yokosuka, Japan. Players guided Ryo Hazuki on his quest to avenge his father while exploring shops, arcades, and even part time jobs in a living, breathing world. Its massive budget and cinematic approach pushed the limits of the Dreamcast, influencing future open world and story driven games despite its commercial struggles. Though divisive in its day, Shenmue became a cult classic and is now remembered as a bold experiment ahead of its time. This was covered back in episode 219. So if you want to hear the full story, go check that out.
200 episodes later, much better quality.
Slightly better quality.
Okay, fair enough. Itsy bitsy amounts of quality increased.
And here we are 60 episodes later. What do you know? Last up for this week in gaming history, on December 30th, 2003, Sega released Sonic Heroes for the PlayStation 2 in Japan, marking the first Sonic the Hedgehog title developed for multiple consoles simultaneously. Moving away from the Dreamcast exclusivity of earlier 3D Sonic games, Heroes introduced a team based system letting players control three characters at once, balancing speed, flight, and power abilities to navigate stages. Featuring 4 unique storylines and 12 playable characters, it aimed to celebrate the series' growing cast while bringing Sonic into the multi platform era. Though its camera and controls were divisive, the game was praised for colorful visuals, fast paced action, and nostalgic callbacks to Sonic's 2D roots. As a commercial success, Sonic Heroes was a turning point for Sega, showing that its flagship franchise could thrive beyond Sega's own hardware, helping secure Sonic's place in the modern multi platform landscape.
Isn't there like a Sonic's Hero theme song that just goes Sonic Heroes?
All I know for Sonic music is gotta go faster. Faster, faster, faster.
That's been Sonic from day one.
Yeah. I don't know. I never really got into Sonic. I played Shadow the Hedgehog, and that was probably the extent of my Sonic play. Um,
Oof. Oof.
so what? It was a good one.
No.
Dave, I don't think people want to hear that. It's we have a topic for today. So why don't we, get on
We
with it?
don't have a topic for today. We never have a topic. We just
Well, I never have a topic.
we show up every week and I just talk about whatever comes up off the top of my head.
Yeah, okay.
I'm just
Sure thing,
I'm
Dave.
just good. I'm just good like that.
Yeah, all right, whatever you think.
By 1990, the PC adventure landscape was already crowded. Sierra Online had cemented itself as a leader of the genre with King's Quest, Space Quest, and I guess Leisure Suit Larry, if you
Hell
want
yeah.
to, talk about it. They all kind of defined what a graphic adventure looked like. Elsewhere, Lucasfilm Games was pushing forward with its own unique style. It had quirky humor, and they were developing the Scum engine. So its titles, at the studio's titles, were gaining a lot of polish. They had games like Maniac Mansion and Zach McCracken. These were all big studios with teams of artists and teams of writers and programmers, everyone that just kind of worked together. These are all stories that we've told before. We covered King's Quest in episode 89. We covered Maniac Mansion in episode 162. But our topic today, Hugo's House of Horrors. It takes so much effort for me to say horrors. I'm not even going to, and I can't even get it right. Horrors.
It's a tough one, Dave. I agree with you.
Triple H wasn't born in a studio. No, I'm just kidding.
Oh my god.
I know. So Hugo wasn't born in a studio. It was a one man project created by a British programmer named David P. Gray. Don't know what the P stands for. Gray founded his company, Gray Design Associates, in 1988 while working at Raytheon in Massachusetts, where he wrote air traffic control software. At the time, he wasn't looking to compete with any of the big studios. He didn't want to go toe to toe with the Sierras or the Lucasfilms. In fact, they didn't even really register on his radar, no pun intended. He wasn't even looking to create video games. In his own words, he just wanted a plan B in case his day job fell through. His first two products that the design studio put out weren't even games; they were business programs. Game a program called Touch Type Tutor, and some OCR software that was bundled with hand scanners. What he was looking for was just more control over his career, and he just couldn't envision himself with a future that tied him to a large company. Even before then, Gray had a history of tinkering with games. His very first job, in which he worked for the United Kingdom Ministry of Defense, came with access to a vector graphics system. There, he was tasked with writing software for underwater weapons, but he couldn't resist using that same system to write an asteroids clone on the side. Now, his manager turned a blind eye to this. It was a good student exercise. The experience he gained was very practical and could be applied to his actual job. And it was about this time that he stumbled across the classic text adventures that were incredibly influential during this time, like Colossal Cave, aka Adventure, and also Dungeon. His early experiences playing these games, his early experiences designing an asteroids clone, this all stayed with him. Now, the moment that pushed him into games was surprisingly random. He was at a party in 1989 and he struck up a conversation with a gynecologist who mentioned that he had written a simple program in BASIC and was selling it worldwide. And for David P. Gray, this was an aha moment. The light bulb switched on. He thought if this guy could do it, so could he. So when Gray sat down in late 1989 to write his first PC game, he already had some experiences and he kind of already had some influences and a concept in mind. He later said that he admired Captain Comic. That was a shareware platformer by Michael Denio because it specifically showed that one person could release a game with large animated sprites and then put it out into the world and distribute it successfully. And admittedly, he said he also admired Sierra Online's Leisure Suit Larry in the Land of Lounge Lizards. And not just for the humor. We've done an episode on it. We know that humor was a big point to it. When he got to the end and he saw the what he calls mile long credit list for Leisure Suit Larry, he thought to himself, if all those people could do it together, maybe I can show them up and do something similar all by myself. In fact, the game's title, Hugo's House of Horrors, was chosen as a tribute to Leisure Suit Larry and its executable, which was LLL, as in Land of the Lounge Lizards. So now for Hugo's House of Horrors, we have HHH.exe. It's its executable.
That surprisingly makes a lot of sense.
Yep, Leisure Suit Larry, Hugo's House of Horrors. Lounge Lizard, yeah, get it. From that point on, David P. Gray set about building Hugo's House of Horrors. He worked nights, he worked weekends, he wrote the game entirely in the C programming language, handling the graphics, the parser, the puzzles, and the story all by himself. Remember, this is a one man show. He kept the setup simple enough. Hugo's girlfriend, Penelope, had been kidnapped and taken to a haunted mansion. And so Hugo goes to the haunted mansion. He searches the house. He has to solve puzzles. He has to survive encounters with, your typical stock horror characters like mad scientists and vampires. Frankenstein's monsters in there. There's a creepy butler too as well. Like all the adventure games that Gray took inspiration from, he had to rely on a text parser. So players explore the mansion by typing commands like open door, look under bed, or give steak to dog. Now this is one of the early text adventure games, so the parser was notoriously unforgiving, as many of them were at this time. If you missed the precise phrasing, you'd be stuck. And that is a source of frustration that, looking back, people kind of retrospectively feel like it's part of the game's charm. But if the mechanics were simple but frustrating, the humor is kind of what gave Hugo its character. The game really leaned into parody. It poked fun at horror cliches, it poked fun at adventure game tropes. It wasn't scary so much as tongue in cheek. It was a B movie haunted house tour where you never knew what oddball encounter might be waiting in the next room. Gray later admitted in an interview that while designing the game, he didn't really have some big marketing plan, nor did he have a carefully researched audience in mind when he made the game. In fact, when he was asked about his target demographic, he laughed and said the target audiences was just me. So
Nice.
he basically sat down to make a game for himself, right?
I mean, hey, if you can, why the hell not? You know yourself better than
He
anyone else and can make your best game.
Yeah, he wasn't very naive, right? He just wanted to make something that he'd enjoy playing himself. Demographics weren't even on his radar. Demographics weren't even really a thing when this was made, you know? So in practice, the game was really aimed at anyone who had an IBM PC that also liked puzzles because that's how he identified, right? Gray thought that it would stand out because in the shareware space that he was familiar with, there was nothing else quite like it. And so he kind of deliberately designed it to be immediately accessible. It was large and friendly. Um, there were colorful characters on the screen. There's no heavy exposition, no long instructions. It's just simple and accessible. You are simply dropped outside a house and told nothing. And I know when I say accessible, you think, well, accessible means hold a hand, but immediately accessible in his mind was just drop in and let them play the game, right? Because that's what the old text adventures that he was used to had done. That's what Colossal Cave Adventure had done. That's what, the Maniac Mansions and the Dungeons and the King's Quest of the world all did. They didn't spend time with tutorials. They didn't spend time with backstory. You got dropped in and you had to figure it out. Gray later joked, while kind of talking about the accessibility, that he hadn't really counted on half of America not being able to spell the word pumpkin. And that wasn't just a throwaway gag in an interview, it ties directly into the game's very first puzzle. When Hugo arrives at the mansion, the front door is locked. And the solution is that you have to type open pumpkin to discover a hidden key inside a pumpkin on the porch, and then you use that to unlock the door and step inside. But apparently, people really struggle with the word pumpkin, Rob. Do you struggle with pumpkins?
Well, Dave, I know it's spelled Punkin, so it can't be that hard.
Oh, yeah. Well, that's probably the problem right there. Hugo's House of Horrors had a simple start, but that kind of set the tone for the whole experience. It dropped you right in to make the house accessible, but it wasn't going to explain itself. If you couldn't solve the pumpkin, you probably weren't going to enjoy the rest of the adventure. So, with that test in place, Gray wrapped up the game in late 1989 and prepared to share it with the world. And so its official release date, kind of sorta, is January 1st, 1990, when Hugo's House of Horrors was officially released as shareware. That timing is not coincidental. Gray liked the symbolism of kicking off a new decade, January 1st, 1990, with his first big project
Damn.
planned.
Guy just got to figure it all out, everything. Makes
I
his own
mean,
game, sets it on a specific time. Like, damn.
what happens after its release is really something we've talked about before. It's the magic of shareware, right? Hugo's House of Horrors may not have had Sierra's marketing budget or the polish of Lucasfilm games, but it had something those big studios didn't, in that it was readily available online. It was free to download. It was easy to copy onto floppy disks. And so as a result, Hugo spread like wildfire. Kids traded it at school, computer clubs were uploading it to bulletin boards, and shareware distributors were bundling it alongside, solitaire clones and Tetris knockoffs. For many players, because of its timing, Hugo was their very first adventure game. They hadn't yet got their hands on a box copy of, say, King's Quest or Monkey Island, but here was a haunted house mystery sitting right there in the shareware aisle, waiting for them to explore it on their PC. The 16 color graphics were simple. The parser was unforgiving, but the humor and the spooky charm definitely won people over. Hugo as a game wasn't so much scary as it was playful. It was kind of like a Halloween party in game form. And so it got put out into the world and people played it and it was successful. In fact, revenue from shareware would exceed royalties from any retail sales by about 6 to 1. And what's more remarkable is when I say shareware, Gray didn't really do any marketing. He just uploaded the game to a couple of CompuServe forums and let the community take it from there. And so, because like I said, Hugo was so unique in that shareware space, it just caught on fire and people wanted it. It spread all over the place. So distributors picked it up. They sold it through mail order catalogs. They bundled it on floppy disks, alongside the other shareware. Eventually, Gray was approached by vendors who repackaged the game as low cost retailer without even mentioning that it was a shareware game in any way, shape, or form. And then in 1992, the series finally found a retail home, like an official retail home. Paul Jacobson's Soft Source was a budget publisher that picked up Hugo and put the game into stores nationwide. But really, like I said, the royalties from the shareware model exceeded the royalties from retail 6 to 1. It was nice to get it into stores, but it wasn't the main avenue for by which people were getting the game, right? For Gray, what kind of began as a personal experiment had inevitably turned into a hit within the shareware community, one that was strong enough to consider continuing Hugo's story. And so it didn't end with just one game. Hugo's House of Horrors was just the beginning. Rob, one of the tricky parts of Hugo's House of Horrors was figuring out the right words to type into that old parser. If you didn't get the phrase exactly right, you were stuck.
Yeah, kind of like me trying to record a podcast without the right tools. If I don't say the magic words, nothing happens.
Exactly. But here's the thing, these days, you don't need the perfect command to sound good. That's where Zencaster comes in. It's an all in one podcasting platform that makes it easy to record high quality audio and video straight from your browser.
So, no typing in commands like record podcast with Dave.
Nope. Just log in, hit record, and you're set. Plus, Zencaster's post production tools automatically clean up background noise, balance your audio, and even cut out filler words. So you don't have to type delete 100 times.
That sounds a lot easier than trying to guess parser commands, but what about getting the podcast out there?
Zencaster handles that too. With a couple of clicks, you can publish to Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and all the major platforms. No floppy disks required.
Nice. So, how do our listeners get started?
Head over to zencaster.com/pricing and use our offer code, all one word, memory card lane, and you can get 30% off the first month of any Zencaster paid plan. Whether you're launching your first show or upgrading your current one, Zencaster makes it as easy, or not, as opening a pumpkin.
And with that, let's get back inside Hugo's haunted house and see what other puzzles are waiting.
When the first game proved a hit in the shareware scene, Gray knew that there was room for more. In 1991, he followed it up with Hugo 2, Who Done It, the sequel swapped horror parody for a murder mystery that more so reflected David's British roots. He had grown up reading Agatha Christie novels where the murderer was usually mentioned early on and then barely referenced again until the big reveal. He designed Who Done It in exactly the same spirit, layering suspects and clues into this whole tongue-in-cheek detective story. Hugo 2, Who Done It, also broke ground by putting players in control of not Hugo but Penelope for most of the game. Gray later admitted that this was very much a conscious choice. He wanted to break the mold and give the series a female hero, Miss Marple in disguise, he joked. Now, the game itself, much larger than the first. whereas Hugo's House of Horrors kept players inside a single mansion. Whodunit expanded to sprawling houses, city streets, and even a maze so large that most players had to draw a map. Gray confessed that he, at some point during this development, fell prey to what we call second system syndrome, which is trying to make the sequel bigger and more ambitious than the original. And that meant it took him way longer to finish, despite having the engine already built from the first game. By 1992, Gray rounded out the trilogy with Hugo 3, Jungle of Doom. This one kind of leaned into pulp adventure, stranding Hugo and Penelope in a jungle after a plane crash. Visually, Hugo for this game bore a striking resemblance to Indiana Jones, though Gray said that he had more so Tarzan on his mind as he made the game. The jungle for this one was meant to be South America, though Gray admitted he got a bit confused at some point and he let his artist throw in elephants, even though there are no wild elephants in South America.
How do
If
you
anyone
know?
asks, what's that?
How do you know?
It's a great question. Are there wild elephants in South America?
Highly unlikely, but you don't know.
If anyone asked, he laughed in the interview. It escaped from a zoo, so he's got a good sense of humor about it. Jungle of Doom featured technical improvements like perspective scaling. Hugo kind of shrinks as he walks farther away in the game. It even featured an in-game hint system, but Gray regretted the third one in that he felt that it ended up being too short. For that one, he decided to hire a professional artist, and that made development way more expensive. And so, because it was more expensive, he had to make it the shortest game in the series in order to keep it in under the money he had. Now, Hugo's trilogy was later ported to Windows 3.1, where Gray upgraded the sound to proper Sound Blaster MIDI music and added a point and click interface that was inspired by another game called Beneath a Steel Sky. He joked that the PC speaker tones of the original DOS games were so grating that when he sat down to write proper music for Windows, it meant that he first had to figure out the actual chords the actual chords behind his old beeps and bloops.
Wow.
The Windows ports also renamed the 3 episodes, but Gray admitted that he really couldn't remember why. Maybe just licensing, he thought, to avoid confusion. Uh, and that was kind of it for Hugo. Gray didn't stop there with his own adventures, though. He kept continuing to make text and parser adventures. In 1994, he released a game called Nightmare 3D. It was a first person shooter that reimagined Hugo's haunted house as a full 3D maze of monsters. It's not Hugo, it's just a Hugo mansion as a first person shooter, so to speak. Contrary to rumors, it did not use id Software's Wolfenstein 3D engine. Gray wrote his own engine from scratch because nothing off the shelf existed when he started. It was inspired by a game called Catacombs of the Abyss. That project ended up taking longer than expected, but it scored a historical first. Nightmare 3D for Windows was, according to Gray, to the best of his knowledge, the very first person shooter to run as a native Windows 3.1 application. Little fun fact for you.
I'm trying to figure out what Windows 3.1 is over here. Like, I knew XP 2095. I ain't never heard of 3.1.
It was the Windows before 95.
Okay. It's weird they switched up the naming convention like that, and now we're back to 12 or 11, whatever the hell it is.
Yeah. I mean, you literally had Windows 2 point blah blah, and then Windows 3.1. Windows 3.1 was like the mainstream one for a while before Windows 95 came out. Yeah, it was the mainstream one for a long while before Windows 95 came out, and then Windows 95 took over XP. Wasn't there Millennium in the middle there that was awful?
I thought it was 2000,
Yeah,
but
if you're right, Windows 2000. Yeah,
yeah. And
and then
then
did
6,
2000.
7.
I think then we got back into the numerical ones. I'm sure we're missing one in there, but that's okay. Nightmare 3D was cartoonish. It was deliberately bloodless. Even so, it still managed to get banned in Germany, like many other games, for supposedly corrupting the youth. A ruling that Gray would later admit was absurd given how tame the game really was.
Yeah, that's what's influencing those kids.
I know. Over time, Gray kind of shifted away from Hugo and into different kinds of games. His longest running success is a game called Jigsaw's Galore. That's a customizable digital jigsaw puzzle that he still supports and sells to this day, decades later.
Damn, I was hoping it was those little creepy puppet dudes.
Yeah. Looking back, he's pretty candid about why he didn't return to Hugo. In his words, modern adventure games now come with these expectations of celebrity voice acting and Hollywood style graphics. So the days that he thrived in, the days when one person could release a text adventure and compete in a crowded market, those are long gone. Fans he gets asked by fans from time to time about a new Hugo game, but he says it's just not in the cards. It's just not something he ever plans on doing. But the trilogy is out there if you'd like to play it. There are emulators out there like DOSBox that keep it playable. And um, we talked about Maniac Mansion and the Scum engine. There's an emulator called the Scum Virtual Machine Project, Scum VM Project, and it eventually integrated the Hugo engine into it. So now you can play the Hugo trilogy in the Scum VM project, which is really funny given how much Hugo's House of Horrors is compared to Maniac Mansion. But the reality is that for a game that just started out as a quote unquote plan B by a programmer, a game that just started out as a project for a guy who just wanted to see if he could make something fun, Hugo managed to carve out a pretty impressive cult legacy that there are still fans of to this day. There are still people that want to go back to its spooky, silly world more than 30 years later. Of course, this is just one stop down. This is just one stop on our weekly trip down memory card lane. If you'd like to explore more of adventure gaming's history, you can revisit episode 89, where we covered the birth of King's Quest, or episode 162, where we explored Maniac Mansion. We've also looked at darker adventures in episode 261 on Phantasmagoria. You can, as you know, find any of these episodes wherever you listen to your favorite gaming history podcast, like Spotify or Apple Podcasts. But also, you can go to our archives on our website at www.memorycardlane.com. Rob, what else can people find on our website?
You can find a calendar of our future episode topics to see what we'll be talking about in the coming weeks. You can find a link to our Discord where you can come chat with Dave and I about who knows. You won't know until you go there. You can find a link to our Patreon where you can help support us, get access to ad-free and where you can get access to ad-free and unedited versions of our episodes. And you can find links to our social media where I am on several platforms as Rob_O_Raptor and Dave.
I can be found on various platforms as David is wrong. Each week, we'll tell you one story relevant to the current week in gaming history. It can be about a game, a person, a technology. We've even covered a museum. We've even covered a circus. There was a guy in a monkey suit. Interesting. When we sit down to research new topics each week, the most exciting part is finding out new and interesting things about the games we already know, or even sometimes, like today, the games we've never heard of before. Then we get to come on here and teach you all these fun things about it. It's a fantastic cycle of teaching and learning, learning and teaching. So, Rob, what did you learn today?
Well, Dave, for me, I think that today's big takeaway would probably have to be that not only did this game get released on a specific day to start a first major project and a beginning of a decade, but also that he went so far as to make the game for himself. That's just one of those things that you don't really think about. some people make games and it's like I made my own game that it's for me. But like most time, you're just like they're making a game that they just want to get out there. It's not really for them. They might never even play it. Who knows? I don't know. But it's just kind of funny how this guy wanted something. He made it happen. I shouldn't say funny. It's inspiring and interesting, but it's also a little quirky.
So is the game.
It all makes sense when you tie it together. Yes, but I'm just saying it's a little quirky.
It is.
So, and it's also interesting. I didn't grow up in the era of shareware, so it's still weird to me that things like this just blew up through that.
They're just demos.
No, I mean, yes, I understand that, but like, it wasn't as common of a thing for me. Like,
No,
now it's different now. So,
we obviously did not have the internet in 1990. You know, not that it wasn't out there. Just 1990 was still a little early. I think 91 might have been 93 was AOL. I know we got our first computer had Windows XP, so or Windows 95. I'm sorry, a little Packard Bell. Anyway, we didn't really have it, so there was no going online to places to find these demos. Instead, you'd go into the stores and there would be all these demo discs that would just be listed with 20 things. And as a young kid, you never really thought that they weren't entire games, if that makes sense, because they were games. Like they were 20 games, and you got excited that you could take home a CD, for instance, that had 20 games on it. And I remember playing so many of them over and over and over. And when I look back nowadays, I have no idea how I had the patience to play the same thing over and over and over, because now nobody does that. No, but well, that's not true. Look at you in RuneScape.
yeah,
But I mean, like, imagine if you could never leave the first castle of RuneScape ever. That's essentially what it was like, right? Because a shareware model is where you get the first level or you get the first two levels, and that's all you get. So just pick your favorite game and think about what would happen if you never ever got to leave the first level of that game ever. And that's essentially what playing shareware was like for us. It was interesting, frankly. It was interesting. It was fun, and it was a different time. It was a different time. That's what we do. It was history. We talk about video game history. I just lived more of it than you.
I was going to say, but you beat me to it that you definitely lived it. So is
There are,
that your takeaway for the day, Dave, or did you have something else that you learned today?
I don't know this game in the slightest. I don't recall Hugo's House of Horrors. I don't recall it on a demo disc or shareware or anything. This was a big void of gaming knowledge for me. So never heard of David Gray. This whole episode was a bit of something new. I liked his stance on it. I liked that he was like, I'm going to make it for myself. I liked his joke about how half of America can't spell pumpkin. I like to think that might still be true, unfortunately. But it, I don't know. He did it for himself even from the beginning, right? Because he's working for the Ministry of Defense making software, underwater software, and he's like, I'm going to turn this into an asteroids clone, this vector machine into an asteroids clone. And then he just, hey, I'm gonna in my spare time, I'm going to make a game. And that's kind of what we do, right? In our spare time, we produce a podcast. It's not our job. This isn't what pays the bills. This is a labor of love for both of us. And it's essentially what he did. He just turned a labor and love into a game that we are talking about 36 years later, roughly. And I think that's really fascinating.
That's fair.
So, Rob, before I wrap it up and look ahead to next week, is there anything you'd like to add to today's episode?
I'll just take a quick moment, as I always do, to say thank you so much to everyone for listening. It means the world that you join us week in and week out. So we hope you do enjoy and that you keep listening.
Rob, I said I was going to do a short episode for the first week of the year, and it's technically still a short episode if I wrap it up now.
I mean, is 40 minutes not good enough for you?
As we close the book on Hugo's House of Horrors, we are reminded that sometimes the biggest legacies come from the smallest beginnings. David P. Gray never set out to compete with Sierra or Lucasfilm. He just wanted a plan B, something that he thought would be fun to make. Yet, in doing so, he created one of the more memorable shareware adventures of the early PC era. Hugo may not have had the polish of King's Quest or the humor of Monkey Island, but it had something just as powerful. It was accessible to the masses, passed around on floppy disks, copied in computer labs, and bundled on mail order catalogs. It became an early, if not the first, adventure game for countless players. And for many, it still proves to this day, and proved back when, that one person with persistence and creativity could make a game that people all over the world would remember. So, whether you're opening pumpkins, solving parser puzzles, or just tinkering with your own creative projects, Hugo's story reminds us that passion can be just as powerful as production budgets. Next week, we are trading haunted houses for high speed racing across kitchen tables and backyard gardens. Released in 1991, Micro Machines took the thrill of toy cars and turned it into one of the most creative racing games of its era. With tracks set on breakfast tables, workbenches, and even in the bathtub, it captured the imagination of players everywhere and became one of Codemaster's most enduring hits. Join us as we shrink down to toy size and race through the history of Micro Machines on next week's miniature trip down memory card lane. Do the thing.
Woo!